Nobody in that ballroom should have walked up to Kathleen Drum. She was a stranger in Harlow. No connections, no alliances, no reason for a single person in that room to notice her. She knew it. She had accepted it. She had found her corner, taken her drink, and settled into the quiet discipline of a woman who had learned long ago that watching a room taught you more than working it. That was when she felt it. A small, deliberate tug on the fabric of her dress. She looked down. A little girl. No more than 7. White dress, tiny gold buttons. Kathleen's eye clocked the craftsmanship before her brain caught up. That was not a dress from any store. The child's hands were folded neatly in front of her. She had crossed the entire ballroom floor to get here. Past the bodyguards. Past the important people. Past every man worth noticing in a room full of men worth being afraid of. She had crossed all of it. And stopped here. At Kathleen. She looked up and whispered, "Can my dad sit with you?" Kathleen looked where the child was pointing. At the man the entire gala had been quietly orbiting all evening without realizing it. At Kiwayan, the most feared name in Harlow's underworld, standing alone for the first time all night, watching his daughter with an expression he was not entirely managing to keep off his face. Shinchu did not choose Kathleen by accident. She crossed an entire room of bodyguards, powerful men, and people who would have sent her away without a second look, and she walked past every single one of them to find the one woman in that ballroom who was not afraid of anything. She saw something in Kathleen that nobody else in that room saw. And in 20 minutes, she is going to prove exactly how right she was. Subscribe and hit the notification bell right now. Because what this little girl whispers next is going to pull Kathleen Drum into something she did not sign up for, and she is going to handle it in a way that nobody in that estate is even remotely prepared for. Stay right here. This story is only just beginning. Kathleen pulled out 2 chairs. She had come to Harlow to close deals. Gold, accessories, things that made women feel powerful. She was very good at her job. She was better at minding her business. But somewhere between the first tug on her dress and the second chair hitting the floor, Kathleen Drum had already lost the argument with herself. Because in 20 minutes, this child was going to whisper something that no 7-year-old should know. Something that would pull Kathleen into the most dangerous household in Harlow. Something that would change everything for a man who had no idea his morning tea was slowly killing him. She really should have stayed in Lagos. The gala had not been in Kathleen's original itinerary. Adiz had called that afternoon sounding like a woman who had discovered money she didn't know she was owed, voice pitched at the particular frequency it reached when she had information she considered urgent and socially significant simultaneously. An invitation had come through one of their Harlow contacts. High profile. Charity. The kind of event where the right conversation across the right table opened doors that 3 months of careful emails never could. Kathleen had stood at her hotel window for a full minute, looking at the city below her, before she said yes. She packed the midnight dress. Structured shoulders, floor length, the kind of dress that did its own introduction before she opened her mouth. She arrived at a venue that was extraordinary in the way truly expensive places always were, quietly, deliberately overwhelming. Chandeliers that caught light like suspended water. Men in suits that had never touched a sail rail. Conversations running in 3 languages simultaneously. Kathleen had been in rooms like this before, in Lagos, in London, in Accra. She was not impressed. She also knew nobody knew her, and the canapes were a precise disappointment. She found her corner. Her natural habitat at events like this. Accepted a drink from a passing server, settled in, and began watching. That was when she saw him. Kiwayan stood near the center of the room like a man who had never once in his life wondered whether he belonged somewhere. He was not the loudest presence at the gala. He did not need to be. People arranged themselves around him without appearing to realize they were doing it, a subtle gravitational pull, unconscious and total. Tall, composed, dark suit with the kind of cut that cost time as well as money, a face that communicated absolutely nothing. Not unkind exactly. More like a door with no handle. Beside him stood a woman, elegant in that high-maintenance way, hand resting on his arm, laughing at the right moment with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed natural until it looked effortless. Kathleen filed them both under "not my business" and moved on. What she noticed next was sitting alone at a small table near the edge of the room. A little girl. 7 years old at most. White dress, tiny gold buttons. Legs that did not reach the floor. She was surveying the gala with the calm, unimpressed expression of someone who had seen considerably more than her age had any business accounting for. Nobody was watching the child back. Not the bodyguards positioned at the room's perimeters. Not the woman on Kiwayan's arm. Not Kiwayan himself, who was deep in a conversation he had not chosen to end. Then the little girl turned her head and looked directly at Kathleen. It was the kind of look that had no business coming from a 7-year-old. Steady. Measuring. The look of a decision being made in real time. Kathleen held the gaze. She wasn't entirely sure why. After a long moment, the child looked away first. Kathleen went back to her drink. She was mid-sip when she felt it. The tug came at exactly 43 minutes past 9. Kathleen had been counting, not deliberately, but the way you count things in rooms where you don't know anyone, in small, involuntary units of time that make the space feel less like an absence and more like a chosen observation post. 43 minutes of watching Harlow's most powerful people perform for each other. 43 minutes of canapes that did not justify their presentation and conversation she had no entry point into and no particular desire to find one. Then the tug. Small. Deliberate. The kind of tug that comes from someone who has thought about the action before performing it. She looked down. The child was exactly as she had appeared from across the room, white dress, gold buttons, hands folded with a composure that belonged to someone 40 years older. Up close, her eyes were the detail that landed differently. Dark and very still and carrying something that made Kathleen want to put her drink down. "Can my dad sit with you?" she whispered. Kathleen looked across the room. At Kiwayan, who was standing alone for the first time all evening, watching his daughter with an expression he was clearly working to manage and not entirely succeeding. She had noticed him earlier, everyone had noticed him, whether they admitted it or not, the gravitational center of a room full of people with power and the particular quality of a man for whom power was not an event but a condition. He was not what she expected him to look like. He was not performing. That was the thing. Everyone else in the room was, in one way or another, performing. Kiwayan was simply present. It was more unsettling than anything theatrical would have been. She looked back at the child. At the folded hands and the waiting eyes. "Where is your mother?" Kathleen asked. Something moved across the child's face. Too fast and too controlled to be grief, but in the neighborhood of it. "She's not here," she said simply. Kathleen pulled out 2 chairs. The child sat and smoothed her dress over her knees with the precision of a much older person. She looked at Kathleen with the open, evaluating curiosity of someone who has already made a decision and is simply confirming it was the right one. "You're not from here," she said. Very observant, Kathleen said. "I'm not." "You came alone." Also correct. "You're not scared of anything in this room." The child said it as a fact, not a compliment. Kathleen tilted her head. "What makes you say that?" "Because everyone else is," the child said. "But you're just standing in your corner drinking your drink like this is a normal party." Kathleen laughed. It came out warm and genuine and slightly too loud for their quiet corner. She didn't mind. "What's your name?" "Shinchu." A small pause. "Shinchuki." Kathleen felt something register. She filed it and kept her expression level. "Kathleen Drum," she said. "Nice to meet you, Shinchuki." Shinchu nodded as though the introduction was a formality they both already knew was going somewhere. They sat for a few minutes in a silence that was, surprisingly, comfortable. Kathleen watched the room. Shinchu watched her father. Kiwayan had not come to them. He had returned to his associates, back in conversation, but the quality of his attention had shifted. Kathleen could feel it without looking directly at him. The particular awareness of a man tracking something in his peripheral vision. "Is that your father?" Kathleen asked. "Yes," Shinchu said. "He looks important." "He is. That's the problem." Kathleen glanced at her. "What do you mean?" Shinchu did not answer immediately. She was watching the woman beside Kiwayan, the one with the practiced laugh and the hand always finding his arm, refill his glass from a private bottle she had carried to the table herself. She watched the woman look up at Kiwayan as he accepted it, that particular smile, warm and deliberate. Shinchu's small hands tightened slightly in her lap. Then she turned to Kathleen. "Can I tell you something?" "You can tell me whatever you want," Kathleen said carefully. Shinchu looked at her with those steady, old eyes and said, in a voice so quiet that Kathleen had to lean in to catch it, "The woman next to my father. She put something in his tea every morning. I've seen her 3 times. The noise of the gala continued around them. Glasses clinking. Laughter rising and falling. Music drifting from somewhere Kathleen couldn't locate. And in their quiet corner, a 7-year-old had just handed her something that felt like a live wire. "Have you told your father?" Kathleen asked, keeping her voice entirely steady. Shinchu shook her head. "He won't believe me. He never believes me about her. She's very good at smiling." She said it without bitterness. Just fact. The kind of fact a child arrives at when she has already tried and failed and filed the result. "I just wanted someone to know," Shinchu said. "So that when something bad happens to him someday, at least one person knew it was coming." Kathleen looked at this child. At the composure, the precision, the specific weight of what she had just done, not asking to be rescued, not asking for anything at all, just needing to put the weight down somewhere. Even briefly. Even with a stranger she would never see again. Before she could respond, Shinchu stood, smoothed her dress, and said simply, "Thank you for letting us sit with you." Then she walked back across the gala floor, sat at her small table, folded her hands, and looked at nothing. As though the conversation had never happened. Kathleen picked up her drink. Put it back down. Picked it up again. She looked at Kiwayan across the room, accepting another drink from the woman beside him, completely unaware. She looked at Shinchu, sitting alone, watching her father with those quiet, careful eyes. Kathleen Drum had come to Harlow to mind her business. She stared into her glass for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone and called Adiz. Shinchu just handed a complete stranger the most dangerous secret in Harlow and walked back across the room like she was returning a library book. She is 7 years old. She has been carrying this alone. And Kathleen Drum, who came to this city to close 3 business deals and leave unbothered, is standing in a ballroom corner staring at a glass she has picked up and put down twice. Subscribe and hit the bell right now. Because the call she is about to make to Adiz is going to change everything. And Adiz is going to have opinions. Very loud opinions. Adiz, Kathleen said when her business partner picked up. How do you feel about me making a slight detour before we fly home? What kind of detour? Adiz asked slowly. I need to find out how someone applies to work as a housekeeper. A long silence. Then, Kathleen. Yes. Kathleen Drum. Who owns a gold business? The very same. You want to apply as Adiz stopped. Started again. Domestic staff. Yes. Have you been drinking? Barely. Kathleen, I am going to need you to physically walk away from whatever conversation or person or situation has just happened, because we did not build this business from nothing so that you could go and scrub somebody's floors in Harlow. We did not do that. Nobody said anything about scrubbing floors. That is literally what housekeepers do. Adiz, lower your voice. I will not lower my voice. Kathleen held the phone away from her ear and watched Esairin refill Kiwayan's glass again across the ballroom. That practiced, beautiful smile. Those careful hands. I'll explain everything tomorrow, she said. Just do me a favor and look up domestic staffing agencies in Harlow tonight. I hate you, Adiz said. You love me. I genuinely do not right now. Good night, Adiz. She hung up, looked one last time at Shinchu sitting small and alone at her table across the room. The child did not look back. She had said what she needed to say. She had moved on. But Kathleen had not. The domestic staffing agency Adiz found, under extreme protest accompanied by a running commentary of grievances lasting 45 minutes, was called Harlow Premium Household Services. They specialized in placing high-caliber domestic staff in the homes of the city's elite. Discreet. Professional. Thorough background checks, which Kathleen noted and factored into her preparation accordingly. She sat across from the agency coordinator the next morning in a neat office in the financial district and answered every question with the calm confidence of a woman who had negotiated with difficult people in difficult rooms her entire adult life. She had done her homework. She knew what to say, how to frame her international background, how to make 3 decades of business acumen sound like transferable domestic competence. The coordinator looked at her application, looked at Kathleen, looked at the application again. You have no prior household experience. I am an extremely fast learner, Kathleen said pleasantly. The household you're being considered for has very specific requirements. The employer is, she paused. Particular. I work well with particular people, Kathleen said. In fact, I prefer them. 3 days later, the call came. She had been placed at the key estate. She called Adiz immediately. I got it, she said. Silence. Then, Kathleen. Do you know whose house that is? I have an idea. An idea. Adiz's voice dropped to a furious whisper. That man is not a regular person. That is not a regular house. You cannot walk in there with your strategy and your composure like you're closing a gold deal in Accra. Watch me, Kathleen said. A longer silence. If you die, Adiz said finally, I'm keeping the business. Fair enough, Kathleen said. The key estate was exactly what Kathleen had expected and still somehow more than she was prepared for. Gates that took 30 seconds to drive through. Gardens with their own internal logic, manicured to the specific standard of someone who understood that beauty, like everything else, was a form of authority. A main house that communicated power without announcing it, clean lines, understated luxury, the kind of architecture that said old money even when the money was not old at all. Kathleen arrived with 2 other new staff members, was shown to the domestic quarters, given a uniform that she noted was actually well cut, navy, structured. Someone with taste had made this decision, and briefed by the head housekeeper, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Ark, who spoke in clipped sentences and moved through the estate's corridors with the brisk certainty of someone who had not wasted a step in 20 years. "You will learn the household schedule in your first week," Mrs. Ark said, walking at a pace that required Kathleen to extend her stride. "You will not speak unless spoken to by members of the household. You will not make eye contact with Mr. Key unless he addresses you directly. You will not." "Mrs. Ark." A small voice. They both turned. Shinchu was standing in the corridor in her school uniform, backpack on, apparently having just arrived home. She was looking at Kathleen with an expression that gave absolutely nothing away. Not recognition. Not surprise. Nothing. Kathleen looked back at her with equal blankness. "Miss Shinchu," Mrs. Ark said, her manner shifting into something approaching warmth. "You're home early. Practice was cancelled." Shinchu was still looking at Kathleen. "Is this new staff?" "Yes. This is Kathleen. She joined us today." Shinchu looked at Kathleen for exactly one more careful second. Then she looked away. "Okay," she said simply, and walked down the corridor toward the staircase. Just before she reached the stairs, she turned her head slightly, not enough for Mrs. Ark to notice, and her eyes found Kathleen's one more time. A brief, deliberate look. Then she was gone. Message received, Kathleen thought. We don't know each other. The first week at the Key estate taught Kathleen 3 things. The first was that Kiwayan ran his household the way he presumably ran everything else, with quiet, absolute authority. He was rarely seen but always felt. When he moved through a room, the temperature seemed to change by a degree. Staff straightened without being told. Conversations paused. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. And he was, Kathleen noticed from her first full day, genuinely fair to the people who worked for him. He knew Mrs. Ark's grandson's name. He thanked the groundskeeper. He was building something he was trying to keep clean, and he was doing it with a quiet, deliberate effort of a man who understood that reputation and reality were different things and had chosen, at some point, to close the gap between them. The second thing she learned was that Seirin was very, very good at being liked. She was warm with the staff, generous with compliments, laughed easily and often. Kathleen watched her the way she watched difficult business partners, with a pleasant expression and absolutely no relaxation of attention whatsoever. She noticed that Seirin's warmth never quite reached her eyes when she thought nobody was looking. She noticed how carefully Seirin managed Kiwayan's schedule. His meals. His tea. Always his tea. She noticed the private cabinet in Seirin's dressing room that required a separate key and that Seirin was very, very careful about the mornings she visited it. The third thing Kathleen learned was that Shinchu John Key, for a 7-year-old, had extraordinary self-control. They passed each other multiple times a day, in corridors, at meals, in the garden. Shinchu never acknowledged her beyond what was normal for a child interacting with household staff. No lingering looks, no secret signals, nothing that would draw a single eye. But one afternoon, while Kathleen was restocking the library, a room she had specifically requested to be assigned to, because it had a clear sightline to the main sitting room where Kiwayan took his afternoon tea, she felt a small presence beside her. She did not look down. She continued arranging books. There's a loose tile behind the East Garden bench, Shinchu said quietly, her voice completely conversational, as though she were commenting on the weather. If something needs to be kept somewhere safe. Then she walked out of the library. Kathleen stared at the bookshelf for a moment. Then she allowed herself a very small smile. She had thought, at the gala, that this child was a scared little girl carrying too heavy a secret. She was beginning to understand that Shinchu-ki was considerably more than that. Shinchu just gave Kathleen operational intelligence about a safe storage location behind a garden tile and delivered it like she was discussing the weather. She is 7. Kathleen has been a professional businesswoman for 2 decades and she is currently taking tactical direction from a child in a school uniform. Subscribe right now, because Kiwayan has been walking through rooms Kathleen is working in at a frequency that is statistically improbable. And Shinchu has noticed. And she is keeping records. This estate has absolutely no idea what it is dealing with. Kathleen had been at the estate for 2 weeks when she began collecting. She had engineered, through patient maneuvering that Adiz would have found simultaneously impressive and horrifying, a rotation that placed her in the household's morning service 3 times a week. This gave her proximity to the tea service. Proximity gave her access. Access, for Kathleen Drum, was all she had ever needed. She documented everything in an encrypted note function on her phone that looked, to anyone who glanced at it, like a grocery list. Transaction time she had observed. The small unmarked bottle that appeared in the morning service on specific days and not others. The particular morning routine Sairin followed on the days she used the separate cabinet key, the shower first, then the dressing room, then the kitchen with a timing that never varied by more than 4 minutes. She photographed what she could. She stored everything behind the loose garden tile exactly where Shinchu had told her it would be. Adiz's contact, a pharmaceutical researcher named Dr. Wohl who owed Adiz a favor large enough that he had never asked for details and never would, was waiting for a sample. Getting it out of the estate without detection required timing and patience and the kind of nerve that Kathleen had been building her entire adult life. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. Kathleen was not proud of the method. She was entirely comfortable with the result. The sample left the estate in the lining of a uniform jacket that was being sent for professional cleaning, the kind of arrangement that required a particular combination of timing, access, and a groundskeeper named Sudal who had worked at the estate for 11 years, had very specific opinions about Sairin, and had decided within 72 hours of Kathleen's arrival that he liked her without being entirely sure why. He asked no questions. She offered no explanation. The sample left the estate. It would reach Dr. Wohl by the following morning. What Kathleen had not factored into any of her calculations during those 2 weeks was Kiwayan himself. It had started small. The way he moved through rooms she happened to be working in with a frequency that was, she told herself, coincidence. The way he had caught her in the corridor on her 4th day, she had turned a corner without looking, carrying fresh linens, and walked directly into him. The linens had gone one way and her balance the other, and she would have hit the floor entirely if a hand had not caught her arm with a speed that was frankly startling for a man who had appeared to be standing still a second ago. She had found herself upright, arm held, face approximately 30 centimeters from Kiwayan's. Up close, he was more human than he appeared from across gala floors. There was a tiredness around his eyes that the composed expression worked to conceal. He looked at her with something that was not quite surprise, more like recalibration. Like a man updating a calculation. "I apologize," Kathleen said immediately, stepping back, reaching for the fallen linens. "I wasn't looking where I was going." "Neither was I," he said. His voice was lower than she had expected. She kept her eyes on the linens. She was excruciatingly aware that she was supposed to be invisible. "You're new," he said. 2 weeks, sir." "You're not from Harlow." Kathleen almost smiled. His daughter had said the exact same thing. "No, sir." He said nothing further. She gathered the last of the linens, gave a small professional nod, and continued down the corridor. She did not look back. But she felt him watching until she turned the corner. In her room that night, she called Adiz. "I bumped into him today," she said. "Into who?" "Oh no." "Kathleen?" Nothing happened. It was 30 seconds. A pause. He caught me before I fell. Adi's voice went very careful. Kathleen Drum, don't. I'm not saying anything. Good. I'm just sitting here being your business partner and not saying anything about the fact that you went into that estate to save a man and now he is catching you when you fall. Adiz, I will hang up. Very romantic, Adiz said. She hung up. Kathleen sat on her narrow staff bed in the dark and had a very firm internal conversation with herself about the current situation. The conversation was not entirely successful. The results from Dr. Woll came back 4 days later. The compound in SAE Rin's bottle was not immediately lethal. It was slow. The kind of thing designed to look like declining health over months, eventually years. Untraceable without specific testing. Sophisticated enough that someone with significant resources had sourced it. Kathleen sat with that information for a full day, turning it over the way she turned over difficult business situations, not with emotion, not yet, but with the methodical attention of someone who needed to understand the full shape of a problem before she decided what to do about it. She thought about Shinchu watching her father accept his tea every morning. She thought about a 7-year-old who had calculated that he would not believe her and so had simply accepted that something bad would come someday and decided that at least one person should know. She thought about how unbearable it was to be that child. She had been about to go looking for a way to reach Kiwayan's head of security, a lean, careful man named Taisul whom she had observed for 2 weeks and assessed as someone with his own concerns about the household's current arrangement, when the east gate came off its hinges. It was not a loud sound. That was the first thing she registered. More of a controlled certainty, the sound of professionals who had done this before and knew exactly how much time they had before the estate's internal security responded. She was in the east courtyard ostensibly trimming a hedge line, actually watching the delivery gate where a particular vehicle had been expected since yesterday, when the world went sideways. 6 men. Tactical. Deliberate. They came through the back, because professionals always come through the back, and they moved with the coordinated efficiency of people who had studied this specific layout. 2 of Kiwayan's guards went down fast. One took something to the shoulder, the other hit the ground before he could clear his weapon. Kiwayan was backed against the east wall, 1 man against 3, holding his own the way a man holds his own when he is genuinely dangerous, but the numbers are simply, flatly, wrong. Kathleen assessed this in approximately 1 second. Then she moved. She came from the blind angle, the gap between the garden storage and the east wing that none of the 3 men were watching, because why would they watch a housekeeper? She hit the closest one with everything she had. No announcement, no hesitation, no warning. She had grown up in places that taught you that the person who announces themselves first loses. She had never forgotten that lesson. Her elbow connected with the side of his neck and he went sideways. She was already moving to the second one before the first hit the ground. The second man was bigger and he turned fast. He grabbed her arm and she let him, used his grip and his momentum and the half-second of confidence that came with his size against him, twisted in a direction he wasn't expecting, and introduced his face to the courtyard wall with a force that left a mark on both. He dropped. The third had a knife. Kathleen picked up the garden tool. What happened next lasted maybe 40 seconds and would not appear in any choreographed film sequence. It was ugly and close and brutally efficient in the way that violence is when it comes not from training but from years of understanding exactly how much damage a human body can absorb and precisely where it cannot. She took a cut across her forearm that she did not acknowledge. She gave back considerably more than she received. When Kiwayan's inner security poured into the courtyard, the situation was already resolved. Kathleen was standing in the middle of it. Garden tool in hand, breathing normally, a cut on her forearm bleeding quietly onto her uniform sleeve. She looked at the damage around her. She looked at the tool in her hand and set it down. Then she looked at Kiwayan. He was looking at her with an expression that had completely abandoned any pretense of composure. Not fear. Not confusion. Something trying to locate a category for what it had just witnessed and finding that no existing category was adequate. Kathleen straightened her uniform collar with her uninjured hand. "Should I finish the East Wing linens?" she said, "or is that no longer a priority?" Silence. One of the security team members made a sound that might have been a laugh, immediately converted into a cough. Kiwayan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Come inside." Kathleen Drum just dismantled 3 armed professionals with a garden tool while her forearm was bleeding and then asked about the East Wing linens with the tone of a woman inquiring about the schedule for a Tuesday. Kiwayan has not blinked. His security team is having a medical episode. And Shinchu, somewhere in this estate, has absolutely no idea what just happened and is probably doing homework. Subscribe right now, because the conversation about what will happen in that study is going to change every single thing. And Kiwayan still has not blinked. Kiwayan's private study was the kind of room that told you everything about a man without him saying a word. Clean lines. Nothing unnecessary. Every object earns its place. Books that had actually been read, a desk that had seen real work, no performance of power, just the quiet, settled confidence of someone who did not need to prove anything to the room he sat in. Kathleen took it in the way she took in everything, quickly, completely, storing it without appearing to look. She stood near the door while Kiwayan spoke briefly with Taisul in Korean she did not follow. She waited with the patience of someone who had spent her professional life in rooms where she had to wait for men to finish before she could speak. It had never bothered her. Patience was just a strategy with better posture. When Taisul left and the door closed, Kiwayan turned and looked at her properly for the first time since the courtyard. He crossed the room, not to his desk, but to her. He stopped in front of her and looked at her forearm, the sleeve dark with blood now. He reached out and pushed the fabric back carefully. Kathleen let him. She watched his face while he assessed it. Something was moving through his expression that was controlled but not entirely. "Sit," he said. "It's fine." He looked at her. Just looked at her. The particular look of a man who had decided something and was waiting to see if she was going to make it complicated. Kathleen Saturday. He pulled his chair from behind the desk and sat directly in front of her, closer than professional distance, close enough that she was aware of exactly how close, and opened the first aid kit from the desk drawer with the efficiency of a man who had dealt with wounds before and had opinions about how they should be handled. He worked in silence. His hands were steady and careful and thorough, the kind of thorough that paid attention to getting it right rather than getting it done. Kathleen looked at the top of his head, bent over her arm, and kept her expression neutral with the concentration of someone doing considerable internal work. At one point, he pressed the wound closed with more pressure than she expected. She did not flinch. He glanced up briefly. Something moved through his eyes. He went back to what he was doing. When he finished, he did not release her arm immediately. He held it, not tightly, not demanding anything. Just held it the way you hold something you are not ready to put down yet. Then he looked up. "You took a knife from me," he said. "The knife was already moving," Kathleen said. "I just redirected it." "That's not a distinction that changes what it means." Kathleen said nothing. His eyes moved over her face with the precision she had been watching from a corridor for 2 weeks, the way he looked at things he was genuinely trying to understand. Like she was a problem his usual frameworks could not solve. And he found this, she thought, less frustrating than interesting. "Who are you, Kathleen Drum?" he said quietly. "A businesswoman," she said, "who grew up somewhere complicated." "That's not an answer." It's the only one I have right now. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't come here as a housekeeper." It was not a question. Kathleen had known this moment was coming. She had prepared for it. She met his gaze directly. "No," she said. "I didn't." "Then why did you come?" She thought of Shinchu at the gala. White dress, gold buttons, legs that didn't reach the floor. The weight in those small, steady eyes. "Your daughter told me," she said. At the gala. She wasn't asking for help. She just needed someone to know. And I couldn't unknow it. The room was very quiet. Kiwayan set down the roll of bandage. He looked at Kathleen's arm for a moment, the careful work he had done on it. Then he looked at her. "Leah," he stopped. Caught himself. An old habit surfacing. He never used Shinchu's full first name to strangers. Shinchu told a stranger, he said, more to himself than to her. "She told me she tried to tell you," Kathleen said carefully. "That you wouldn't believe her." Something crossed his face at that. Sharp and brief. She did not look away from it. "She was right," he said quietly. "I wouldn't have." The admission cost him something. She could see it in the set of his jaw. "I believed she loved me." Kathleen said nothing. Some things did not need a response. She reached into her uniform pocket and set the documentation on the desk beside them. The photographs. The lab results. The dates and times she had recorded over 3 weeks. She laid it out the way she had laid out business proposals her entire career, clearly, completely, without drama. He went through it in silence. Page by page. His face remained composed for most of it. Then he reached the lab results. He read them once, read them again. The quality of the silence in the room changed. "How long have you known?" he asked without looking up. 3 weeks, she said. "I needed enough to be certain before I brought it to you." He looked up. "You've been here 3 weeks." "Yes." "You applied to this household 3 weeks ago." "Yes." A pause. His eyes moved over her face with a precision that felt like being taken apart component by component. "I know," he said. "I knew within 72 hours of your arrival that your background check was constructed." He set the documents down. "You knew I'd run one." "I assumed it," she said. "Then you're either very brave or you trusted that what you were doing was necessary enough to weather the scrutiny." A pause. Which was it? Kathleen looked at him. "Both," she said. The study held the silence for a moment. Outside the window, the estate was quiet, the evening dropping over the gardens. "You let me stay," Kathleen said. "Knowing I wasn't who I said I was." Kiwayan was quiet for a moment. "I have been waiting," he said carefully, "for some time, for what I already suspected about this house to surface in a form I could act on. You were finding it faster than anyone I would have sent." He paused. "Also," he stopped. "Also." He looked at her directly. "I didn't want you to leave," he said. Simple. Unadorned. The words of a man who had measured exactly how much to say and had said precisely that. Kathleen held very still. "You'll need to leave the estate tonight," he said. "For your own safety. What happens next will not be," he paused, "suitable for someone who has no obligation to be here." "I understand," Kathleen said. She was almost at the door when he said, quietly, "Miss Drum." She turned. "Thank you," he said. Simple. Direct. Every syllable of it. Kathleen nodded once and left. She got exactly 4 steps down the corridor before she stopped, looked at the ceiling, and had a very firm internal conversation with herself about the man sitting in that study and what she was and was not going to do about him. The conversation was not entirely successful. Kiwayan knocked on Sae Rin's door at midnight. He could have sent Tai Sul. He could have sent his lawyer. He could have sent anyone. He had, in his professional life, sent people to resolve situations considerably more consequential than this one. But he had loved her once, or he had loved what he believed she was, and she deserved to hear the truth from him directly, even when the truth arrived too late for either of them to do anything with it. She opened the door in her robe, hair loose, and looked at him with the warmth she had always had for him. Genuine in its presentation. Practiced in its architecture. 3 years of mornings and evenings and shared conversations. 3 years of looking at that warmth and believing it completely. He looked at it now and felt nothing but tired. "Come with me," he said. She followed him to the study without asking why. She sat across from his desk with the ease of a woman who had sat there many times before. Comfortable. Unguarded. She had no reason yet to be anything else. Then she saw the documents. Her eyes moved over them, the photographs first, her hands, the bottle, the tea service, dates and times she recognized because she had been there for all of them. Then the lab results. Then Kathleen's handwriting, 3 weeks of careful observation laid out in a clear, precise hand that looked nothing like the writing of a housekeeper. He watched her face while she read. It remained composed for most of it. Then she reached the lab results. She read them once. Read them again. The silence in the room changed quality. She looked up. What was underneath the composure was not guilt. It was frustrating. The frustration of a plan 3 years in the making, encountering documentation that left nothing to manage. She sat with it for one moment, long enough for him to see it clearly, too briefly to be interpreted as anything but what it was, and then the composure came back. One final time. "Tell me why," he said. Not "how could you?" Not "I know what you did." Just, "tell me why." The simplest question. The one that gave her the chance, if she wanted to take it, to say something real for the first time. The room was very quiet. Outside, Harlow did its midnight things. Indifferent. Continuous. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You were taking too long." 5 words. Flat. The voice of a woman who had run out of reasons to perform. "I had given 3 years," she continued. "I had positioned myself. I had done everything correctly. And you kept waiting. And waiting. And I didn't know what you were waiting for. I thought you were keeping me close without intention. That I was going to lose everything I had worked for." She looked at the documents. "So I decided to make sure that even if you didn't choose me, you would still need me." Kiwayan said nothing. He looked at her across his desk, at this woman who had built an entire plan around an assumption that was wrong from the very beginning. "I was going to propose," he said quietly. The silence that followed was the fullest silence in the room all evening. Something crossed her face. Sharp and immediate and entirely genuine, the first entirely genuine thing he had seen from her tonight. Not guilt. Not remorse. The expression of a person receiving information that arrives for months too late to change anything. The expression of someone understanding, all at once, the full geometry of what they have destroyed. "I was waiting for Shinchu," he said. "I needed her to choose you first. Because my daughter comes before everything, before the organization, before what I want, before anything else. If something ever happened to me, I needed to know she was safe with the person beside her. That the person I left her with had been chosen by her first." He looked at Rin directly. Shinchu never chose you. The room was completely still. She never chose me, Rin said, very quietly. Almost to herself. No. I tried. Not hard enough, he said. Simply. Without cruelty. Just a fact. Shinchu is not difficult to love. She never has been. She just needed someone to choose her first, before she chose them back. You were always waiting for her to come to you. She was always waiting for you to come to her. He paused. Nobody came. Rin looked at him for a long moment. Something arriving on her face that had nothing to do with composure or strategy. The full weight of 3 years, for months, a plan built on a wrong assumption, a proposal that was already coming, a child who just needed to be chosen first. All of it. Gone for nothing. I didn't want you to die, she said. And her voice, for the first time, had something real in it. Not love. Not guilt exactly. Just the exhausted honesty of someone who has run out of everything else. I just wanted to be enough. Everything I did, I wanted it to be enough for you to choose me. It was enough, he said quietly. You were enough. I just needed more time. She looked at him. He looked back. And in the quiet of that study at midnight, with the document on the desk between them, they both understood something that could not be undone. That somewhere in the space between his patience and her fear, something real had existed once. Something that could have been chosen properly if either of them had known what the other was waiting for. It was the saddest thing in the room. And it changed nothing. You can go now, he said. His voice was completely even. No anger. No performance. Just the absolute finality of a man who had made his decision before he knocked on her door. The door behind her opened. 2 men, waiting. Rin understood what go meant tonight. She stood, smoothed her robe, the composure returning one final time. Not for him. Not for the room. Just because it was the only thing she had left that was entirely hers. She looked at him once more. He had already turned back to the window. She went. Kiwayan stood at his study window alone. The city outside. The documents on his desk behind him. The quiet of a house that had just become smaller and cleaner and emptier all at once. He thought about 3 years, about what he had believed and what had been real and the distance between those two things. He thought about Shinchu going quiet at dinner tables, choosing the far end of rooms, watching with those ancient, careful eyes and seeing something he had refused to find. He thought about a 7-year-old who had crossed a gala floor and whispered a secret to a stranger because she had run out of every other option. She had saved his life twice. Once by never choosing Rin. Once by choosing Kathleen. He stood at that window until the city outside began to change. Until Harlow shifted from night into the grey that comes before morning. Then he sat at his desk, and when Mrs. Ark brought his tea at 7 the next morning, he picked it up and drank it. And for the first time in 4 months, it tasted like nothing but tea. He was going to propose. She poisoned a man who was 2 steps from a yes she had already earned. And the only reason he was waiting, the single thing standing between her and everything she wanted, was a 7-year-old who never chose her. Subscribe right now and do not move. Because Kathleen Drum is packing her bag in the domestic quarters and Shinchu has just heard footsteps in the corridor. And what happens in that hallway before Kathleen reaches the exit is the moment this entire story has been building toward. Kathleen was packed within an hour. It was remarkable, she thought, how quickly 3 weeks could fit back into a suitcase when you were efficient about it. She moved through the domestic quarters corridor with her bag, heading for the staff exit, when she heard them. Small, fast footsteps. She turned. Shinchu was standing in the corridor in her pajamas, hair loose, looking at Kathleen's bag with an expression the child was working very hard to control and losing ground on rapidly. This was not the Shinchu of the gala, composed and measuring. Not the Shinchu who had passed her in corridors for 3 weeks without a flicker of acknowledgement. Not the small, strategic operational mind who had left messages about garden tiles and library sightlines with the composure of a seasoned field officer. This was just a little girl watching someone she loved pack a bag. "You're leaving," Shinchu said. "I am, baby," Kathleen said. Something cracked open on Shinchu's face at that word. Just slightly. Just enough. "Because of what you found. Because my work here is done." But Shinchu stopped. Started again. "Does it have to be?" Kathleen crouched down to her level. Shinchu looked at her with eyes that were doing tremendous work trying not to be wet. "You did something incredibly brave," Kathleen said softly. "You saved your father's life, Shinchu. You did that." "We did it," Shinchu said. Fierce. Immediate. Kathleen felt that in her chest like a physical thing. She opened her arms. Shinchu walked into them and held on with a ferocity completely disproportionate to her size. Arms locked, face pressed hard into Kathleen's shoulder. Holding on the way children hold on when they understand that letting go makes it real. Kathleen held her back. No rush. No gentle untangling. She let Shinchu hold on for as long as she needed to. When the child finally stepped back, her eyes were bright but her chin was up. She smoothed her pajama top, gathered herself back into some approximation of her usual composure. She was 7 years old, and she was heartbreaking. "Will you call me?" Shinchu asked. "Yes," Kathleen said without hesitation. "Promise?" "Shinchu-ki, I promise." Shinchu nodded once, accepting it the way she accepted everything, as confirmed data. Then she looked at Kathleen very seriously and said, "You should know that my father walked into 7 rooms you were working in this week." "I counted." Kathleen blinked. "You counted?" 7, Shinchu confirmed. "In case that information is useful to you." Then she turned around and walked back toward her room with her chin still up and her small shoulders very straight. Kathleen stood in that corridor holding her bag, feeling 7 different things simultaneously. She heard a sound. Looked up. Kiwayan was standing at the far end of the corridor. He had clearly been there for some of that. He looked at Kathleen across the distance, composed, contained. Then he looked at Shinchu's retreating back with an expression Kathleen had never seen on his face before. Something soft and wrecked and proud all at once. Then he looked back at Kathleen. He said nothing. She said nothing. She walked to the exit. The airport was Shinchu's idea. Kathleen found out at 6 in the morning when Mrs. Ark knocked on her hotel room door, which was alarming enough on its own, and informed her, with the expression of someone delivering news they had not signed up for, that a car was waiting downstairs. "Sent by Mr. Key," Mrs. Ark said. Miss Shinchu requested it. A pause. The housekeeper's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She was quite insistent. Kathleen looked at the ceiling. Then she got dressed. The car contained Shinchu in a coat over her school uniform, fully prepared to be late and entirely at peace with this decision, and Kiwayan in the front passenger seat, who turned to look at Kathleen when she got in with the expression of a man who was here against his better judgment and entirely because of a 7-year-old who had left him no viable alternative. "She wanted to come," he said. "I heard," Kathleen said. "I want to come," Shinchu corrected from beside Kathleen, sliding her small hand into Kathleen's without preamble. "There's a difference." The drive to the airport took 40 minutes. Shinchu talked for 38 of them. About her school. About a girl in her class named Guirei who was irritating for reasons that were detailed and specific and entirely compelling. About a book she was reading. About whether Kathleen had ever been to the coast road outside the city because apparently it was very beautiful in the evening and Kathleen should go someday. She held Kathleen's hand the entire drive and occasionally stopped mid-sentence to squeeze it, then continued. Kiwayan sat in the front and said very little. Twice, Kathleen caught him watching them in the passenger mirror. He did not look away when she caught him. At the airport, he walked them to the departure area. Around them, Harlow moved in its efficient morning rhythm, flights called, trolleys rolling, people saying hello and goodbye in the continuous loop that airports ran on. Shinchu had been fine in the car. She had been fine walking through the terminal. She had been very busy being fine. She stopped being fine approximately 4 meters from the departure gate. Her step slowed. Her hand tightened around Kathleen's. Then she stopped walking entirely. I don't want you to go, she said. No composure wrapper. No strategy. Just the plain, unguarded truth of a child who had run out of the energy required to be strategic about her feelings. I know, baby, Kathleen said. Then why are you? Because I have to. For now. For now, Shinchu repeated. Testing the weight of those 2 words. For now, Kathleen confirmed. Shinchu looked at her for a long moment. Then she stepped forward and wrapped both arms around Kathleen's waist and pressed her face into her coat. This time she did not try to be composed about it at all. Her shoulders shook once, just once. Then she held on. Kathleen held her back. She looked up over Shinchu's head. Kiwayan was watching them. His jaw was set. His hands were in his pockets. The composure was present but doing considerable work, and she could see exactly what it was working against. He looked like a man who had something to say and had already decided he was not going to say it. Because he had said something once before, in a corridor outside his study, and she had given him no answer, and he was not a man who repeated himself. He looked at her across the 4 meters between them. She looked back. Kathleen gently eased Shinchu back, crouched down. Shinchu's eyes were wet but her chin was doing its absolute best. I'm going to call you, Kathleen said. Tonight, the moment I land. You promised, Shinchu said. I promised. Shinchu wiped her face with the back of her hand, straightened, the extraordinary composure assembling itself again piece by piece even as Kathleen watched. Okay, she said quietly. Kathleen stood. Looked at Kiwayan. Thank you, she said. For the car. Thanks, Shinchu. His voice was even. His eyes were not. Kathleen nodded. Pulled up her suitcase. Turned toward the gate. Kathleen. She turned back. It was the second time he had used her name without the miss. It landed differently than she was prepared for. He looked at her across the space between them. Around them, Harlow hummed and moved, and a flight to Lagos was beginning its final boarding call. Come back, he said. Quiet. Simple. Not a question, not exactly a command. Something in between that was entirely its own thing. Kathleen looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked through the gate. She stopped once, just before the corridor turned. Not to look back. Just to breathe. One beat of a woman who had been entirely in control of herself since a ballroom corner in Harlow, taking 1 second to absorb what had just been asked of her, by a man who did not ask twice. Then she walked. She was smiling before she turned the corner. She called Shinchu at 11 that night, Lagos time, which was 6 in the morning Harlow time, which meant Shinchu had been awake waiting, which Shinchu denied with transparent unconvincingness. "I wasn't waiting," Shinchu said. "Of course not," Kathleen said. "I just happened to be awake at 6. "You're a morning person." "I may have set an alarm," Shinchu admitted. Kathleen laughed, warm and genuine, filling her Lagos apartment with a sound that felt like it belonged somewhere else too. "How's your father?" A small pause. "He had dinner alone." "He does that sometimes. But tonight he was looking at his phone a lot." "Probably work," Kathleen said. "Probably," Shinchu said, in a tone indicating she did not believe this for 1 second. They talked for an hour. About Lagos, which Shinchu had researched with the focused specificity of someone who had been conducting independent investigation into West African geography and culture since approximately the moment Kathleen left. About the ongoing situation with Guire. About gold, Shinchu wanted to understand the business of it, and Kathleen explained it, and Shinchu listened with the focused attention of someone filing information for future use. Before they hung up, Shinchu said, casually, as though it were an afterthought, "My father wants to know if you arrived safely." "You can tell him I did," Kathleen said. "You could tell him yourself," Shinchu said. "I could give you his number." Silence. Shinchu-ki. "I'm just saying it's available." "Good night, Shinchu." "Good night, Kathleen." "I'll tell him you arrived safely." The call ended. Kathleen sat in her apartment smiling at her phone. 3 minutes later, a message arrived from an unknown Harlow number. "Glad you arrived safely." Kathleen stared at it. Looked at the ceiling. Looked back at it. She typed back, "Your daughter gave you up immediately." The reply came fast. She was supposed to be subtle. "She's 7. She's usually better than this." Kathleen smiled. Set the phone down. Picked it up again. She typed, "How are you?" A longer pause. Then, "Quieter than I expected." She read that twice. They messaged for an hour. About Harlow, about Lagos, about Shinchu's 12-page itinerary for a hypothetical visit, about nothing in particular, about everything that mattered. At some point, he wrote, "She asked me tonight if Lagos is far." Kathleen's hand stilled over her phone. She typed, "What did you tell her?" His reply, "I told her it depends on whether you want to get there." She sat with that for a long time. Outside her window, Lagos was doing what Lagos always did, loud and alive and entirely itself. She had built her life in this city. She knew every sound of it. It had never once felt small to her. Tonight, it felt like it had edges. She opened her flight itinerary. Harlow, for weeks from now. She read it over once. Thought about a departure gate and 2 words and a man who did not repeat himself and had said them anyway. Thought about a little girl who had set an alarm for 6 in the morning and pretended she hadn't. She changed the flight to 10 days. Closed the laptop. Smiled at her ceiling. Adiz was going to have opinions about this. She did not care even a little bit. And somewhere in Harlow, a man who had looked up the distance to Lagos for times that week was still awake, reading a message that ended with a smiling face, in a house that had started feeling different the moment a woman with a suitcase walked out the staff exit. Some stories change you before you realize they have started. Kiwayan sat at his study desk and looked at the city outside his window and understood, with the quiet certainty he brought to everything, that he was already somewhere past the beginning. Shinchu had chosen first. She always knew. End of part 1. Real talk, and that is where we leave them. Kathleen Drum in a Lagos apartment, smiling at a ceiling, with a flight confirmation on her laptop that now reads 10 days instead of 4 weeks. Kiwayan in a study in Harlow, reading a message on a phone he has looked at 4 times in the last hour, in a house that went quiet the moment she walked out the staff exit. And Shinchuki, 7 years old, school uniform, 12-page itinerary already written, sound asleep in a room at the end of the corridor, completely certain, as she has been from the moment she crossed a ballroom floor and tugged on a stranger's dress, that everything is going exactly according to plan. She was never wrong. Not once. Not about any of it. If this story found you and held you from that first tug on the fabric of a dress, then you already know what to do. Hit that subscribe button right now and tap the notification bell, because part 2 of Kathleen and Kiwayan's story is coming, and the first call from Lagos, the 10 days, what Adi says when she finds out about the flight change, and what Shinchu's 12-page itinerary actually contains are not going to stay quiet for long. But before you go anywhere, I need 3 things from you in the comments right now. First, Sairin spent 3 years building something real, misread one man's patience, and made a decision that destroyed everything she had already earned. Kiwayan told her the truth at midnight himself, when he could have sent anyone. Does she deserve sympathy, or did she make her choice the moment she opened that cabinet? Second, Kiwayan knew Kathleen wasn't a maid within 72 hours of her arrival. He had every reason to remove her from the estate immediately. Instead, he walked into 7 rooms she was working in over the following week. Was that the moment he was already lost, or was he just doing his job? Third, and this is the one that is going to split this comment section completely in half, Shinchu crossed an entire ballroom, chose a stranger, whispered a secret, left a message behind a garden tile, counted 7 rooms, arranged an airport car, and surrendered her father's phone number in under 3 minutes. At what point did you realize she was not asking for help? She was running the entire operation from the beginning. Drop your answers below. I read every single one. And the first person who correctly predicts what is on page 1 of Shinchu's 12-page itinerary, I will pin your comment for the entire run of this series. I am your storyteller. Kathleen Drum changed her flight to 10 days. Kiwayan has already looked up the distance to Lagos 4 times. And Shinchu has already won. Part 2 is coming. Stay close.